So my name's Emma Williams and I work for the Department of Conservation in the Fauna Science team. I'm just going to take you through some of the collaborations that we've been doing and some of the work, particularly in the shorebird space over the last couple of years. So this is very much a team effort. So this is DOC's Mobile Terrestrial Threatened Species Research Advisory Group. And on that, the members of staff on this are drawn from lots of different parts of the parts of the Department of Conservation. So we have got on here Sam Krause down the bottom. She is a data analyst for us, so she wrangles all of our data as it comes in. We've got different project leads, Terry Green, Kerry Borkin and Bruce, who have been doing leading different projects. Terry doing forest species. Kerry has got a bat and a kukapa project, Bruce falcon, and then I've got the shorebird portfolio, which I'm going to talk a bit more about today. But it all kind of links together. And then we've got Colin as an advisor, and David helps us link the work stream into other parts of DOC, so particularly what operations are doing. So this particular work stream started with some money that came through in 2018 from when we had a greener government. Yeah, which was great. Yeah. So we're very lucky to have had that, really. So what is a mobile species in terms of this work stream? So this is the definition that we use for the work stream. We have defined it in terms of not just what the birds' behaviours are and how mobile they are, but also in relation to us as people and our boundaries. So that's why we've got in here that it's about what the species is doing in relation to the regional and national landscape boundaries. So rohi, takawa, and our territorial authority jurisdictions. Because all the problems with mobile species are actually people problems. It's problems with us putting boundaries in a location. The birds don't care where the boundaries are. So those boundaries are defining the decisions we make and the management that we're putting in place. And so this work stream is very much about trying to make sure that those boundaries and those decisions are working in terms of the species and what the species is actually doing. Okay, so what's the problem that we're trying to solve here? New Zealand is quite lucky in that it's about 25% of our country as reserves, but we've long suspected that reserve network isn't actually working in terms of the species. When I first started doing work in this kind of area, it was actually when I was still working on the Australasian bittern, not on shorebirds. And at the time, we were picking up that species was sometimes up to 75% of the time outside of this reserve network where management was happening. And so we knew that we had a problem with mobile species, that we're not managing them properly and effectively. For us in the Department of Conservation, that's quite a big deal because we put pretty much 100% of our effort into our reserve network, into our public conservation land. And at the time that I started on this project, things were also prioritised in that even within that reserve network, certain sites were considered a priority for certain things. And then that would be the one place where the work would happen. We've suspected that it's a problem. And now we've sort of started looking at it. But this is it's a very complex thing to solve because if they're not in the PCL land, for us as the Department of Conservation, we have a lot less jurisdiction over being able to save them and being able to help them. And so that is kind of it's then, how do we deal with that problem and how do we solve it? So within the work stream, we divided in the early days, we decided to divide it up into these 6 different kind of priority themes. The idea of doing it like this was that we wanted to make sure that we were working across the whole problem and not just focusing on 1 or 2 different parts of the problem. And so we've got a wetland bird species work stream theme. We've got the forest and the open country bird one, which also has the bat species in. And then the internal migratory coastal bird species. We did want to look at how we can work better with Matamanga Māori and incorporate that into the work. We also recognised early on that this is going to involve putting trackers on birds to work out where they go. And the technology was at a stage where it was all about the battery weight. So we knew we were going to be struggling to put it on those smaller birds, which is quite significant in terms of the coastal species, because a lot of those species and the braided riverbed species are actually quite small, things like Ryville, for example. And so we had a section of our work stream that was just looking at these new technologies that are coming on board, much smaller trackers, and can we get those working in terms of the species, and can we get them working long enough to be able to get the data that we need. We also wanted to make sure that all of our data can get transferred to management pretty quickly. So we've got this final work stream theme, which is actually about making sure that our management is effective, but also that our monitoring is working and that we're able to show that we're making a difference. Because the problem with mobile species is that they're also, because they're mobile, they're not in the areas where we're counting them either. So there's things like double counting happening, because we know that species are moving from one place where one group is counting them and moving to another place where another group is counting them within a short space of time. So we have to actually allow for that in terms of our monitoring, and that means that we have to think outside of the box in terms of how to monitor. Okay, so today I'm just mostly going to focus in these areas of the work stream. 3 projects in particular that we got going that are in the internal migratory coastal bird species section. As I said before, because a lot of the shorebirds and the braided river species are particularly small, a lot of that work is also fits into theme 5. This is project number 1, which some of you will have heard a little bit about because it's a collaboration with Manaaki Whenua. Slesselman is one of our main collaborators, and I know that she's presented to you guys before. So this is our South Island pied oystercatcher project, which is about trying to identify flyways and where they are across the whole country. We've chosen the South Island pied oystercatcher because it's got that larger body size. So it meant that straight away from the beginning, we could put some decent trackers on them, which is going to give us those flyways. So even though they're not as critically endangered as some of the other species that we'd like to look at, it's an important project for us because it's going to give us, we think that those smaller species are also using the same flyways. So it's going to give us that information quite quickly while we're still grappling with developing the technologies for the smaller species. But this is quite complex collaboration that involves us at the Department of Conservation. Our interests in this project are the flyways and what we call the nodes, which is the wintering sites. And then it also involves Birds New Zealand. What they're getting out of the project is more banding opportunities. That also, it's a citizen science aspect of the project where they are feeding back to letting us know where these birds are turning up, particularly the banded and the flagged ones. We can only put trackers on a small proportion, so it's really important to have that aspect of the project. And then we've got Manaaki Whenua, who are doing spatial population models from this data. They're looking at what the critical pinch points are with the population, what's causing the decline, how is the management affecting that decline, and then we're kind of fitting that into where they go, and is that management in the right places. So all fits in together to try and maximise the benefit that we're all getting from one project. So this has been going since 2020 now, so it's a couple of years. We're just getting towards the end of it. So here's just a bit of a snapshot of where some of those flyways were. I'll move on to this. This is project number 2. So this is our black-fronted tern project. It's mostly to date been delivered by master's students. So some of you have seen talks from Fraser Gurney, and then if you haven't already been to a talk by Katie Gray, then I would recommend you do so. She's just writing up at the moment, so hopefully she'll be at the next Braid. This project is about trying to, there's a lot of our work is happening in the management work in the Mackenzie Basin. And again, we're trying to make sure that the management is happening in the right places. Fraser's been looking at what the site use and habitat that black-fronted terns are using. And Katie has been looking specifically at the drylands habitats and the alluvial plains. The alluvial plains and the drylands are they're getting rarer and rarer in terms of habitat. And it's definitely a habitat that's got a lot of pressure on it. And so and yet it was historically for banded dotterels and black-fronted terns, because her project actually includes both. Yeah, quite important habitat for them. And so we wanted to know whether or not the irrigation and all the extra pressures from farming and other developments that's happening in these areas, how that's affecting the terns. Putting the movements on that allows us to look at the complete picture. And so that's what Katie's been up to. Like I say, she's writing up at the moment, so she'll be presenting hopefully soon. This, just to touch on this diagram to the left, that's from Fraser's thesis. I think some of you have seen it already, but for those that haven't, this is the movement of one black-fronted tern that was nesting down here on the Cass River mouth. It was just in a 24-hour period. So they're going to massive distances from the Cass River mouth to the Rakaia and back in 24 hours. And this is our third project. So this has also been going for a couple of years. This is our banded dotterel project. Again, it's about identifying the flyways. So this is taken a little bit longer for us to get going to how we'd like it to be going because of the smaller size. So first off, we started in the first few years with a pilot study, which was just looking at whether it's ethically possible to put some of these new trackers on the species. So we have deployed to date 10 GPS archival tags and 10 Argos tags, which are a satellite transmitter. And that's been very successful to date. We've got quite a bit of data. And now we're at a position, and we've also been able to establish that it's ethically okay to use these trackers. Now we're wanting to expand this project out so it's national. So this is a collaboration with Max Planck Institute in Germany. And so they come over every year to put these trackers on. This is Luke Eberhard Phillips, who's our main collaborator. And he will be coming again this September. We're hoping to put on 200 trackers across the whole country and see where they go. Again, we're getting, what Doc's getting out of this is the flyways and the nodes, but what Luke gets out of it is a lot of blue sky questions, because banded dotterels are one of the few species in the world where they vary in their migratory strategy depending on where the bird is from. So in the Mackenzie, they often go to Australia, but out on Kaikoura, there's kind of like half that go to Australia and half that don't. And then Kaitariki Spit, for example, they all stay. So he's very interested in knowing why this is. Why do we have different strategies with the species? And so he'll be taking some feathers from the breast to determine where the bird has come from. So we'll be doing some isoscope analysis on that breast feather. Because that breast feather is grown in the wintertime, he's able to determine where that bird came from at that time. And then the trackers will also confirm the flight paths and where they went in between, which is great for us. So now I just want to take you through a couple of ways that we, as the Department of Conservation, have been using this data, because you'll see from our collaborators, they're presenting separately on what they're getting out of it in terms of their questions. So this is just kind of extra on these projects for us, our objectives. So first off, there's identifying the risks to collisions with wind farms. So our South Island Pied Oystercatcher project has given us a lot of insights in this space. So just what you're looking at in the middle here, this is the White Uku wind farm. And here, each of these is a turbine. So this is a proposed wind farm at the moment. And each of these lines is a South Island Pied Oystercatcher and where it's flown over that wind farm. So it is giving us some great insights into their flight paths and how it relates to where these proposed wind farms are going in. Just to highlight, we actually only have a very small proportion of the South Island Pied Oystercatcher population with trackers on. So this is high activity across here. The other thing that these trackers give us is there's a lot of behavioural data that comes in as well. So on the right here, this is the flight heights. And what this is telling us, so this is again for the same project, we're able to analyse where they're flying and then also what height to look at risk. And so this is telling us that it was about 25% of the time the SIPO are within the heights of the upper and lower blades of those particular turbines that are being proposed there. For this same site, for Bittern, it was 40%, so which was kind of a surprise for us. So this is a great way to determine what the risk might be for different species, especially with oystercatchers. We knew that they migrate, so it wasn't so much of a surprise that they might be using the same flyways, and the wind speeds and those same wind conditions would be good for them as well as for the wind farms. But for species like Bittern, it was quite a surprise because we didn't think that they did the same kind of behaviours. What it doesn't tell us is whether or not they're actually getting killed by any of these wind farms. We've still got no information on mortality in relation to these species. And so we can only use it in terms of a risk profile, but at least it's a great start for being able to determine what the risks are with these things. This is another example. So this is in our black-fronted tern. This is our black-fronted tern project. Again, there's only a small proportion of the population that are tagged. This is in the Mackenzie and a proposed solar farm. So this bit here is where the solar farm is proposed to go. And so as you can see, there's a lot of activity with black-fronted terns flying over this particular solar farm that is being proposed. Again, it only tells us risk. It doesn't tell us whether or not mortality is happening, but we do know that overseas, solar farms, there are thousands of birds that do end up having coming a cropper with solar farms. So it is enough to give us cause for concern, and at least pass this information on to those so that we can start looking at whether or not this is having an impact or is likely to have an impact. The other thing from here is, so with overseas, it's considered to be, the reason why solar farms is considered to be a concern is that it looks like, this is what it's thought to be. They think that the bird sees them as if they're lakes, as if it's a water body. And so water birds and birds that like insects as well, because the insects are feeding on top of the water, they are the highest risk. And usually overseas, it's been collisions because the birds come down. Because it's about how it looks in terms of water, we also think that it's at night that it's the highest risk, and possibly at moonlit nights. And so we're also able to look at that from the tracking data. We get this great data that's on time of day or night that these flights are happening. And so we can see from this black-fronted tern data that yes, they are flying at night, mostly doing these flights. And so they are actually in the risk bracket, and with us looking at and trying to see whether or not this is likely to have an impact on the species. Also, black-fronted terns. This was, I put 20 GPS trackers on with Mike Bell in the Clarence in 2021. And this is the data from that. So what this has been used for, they were all of these birds were tagged at one site, which was their breeding site. So it was like one colony. So we knew they came and went from that one colony. What we didn't realize is the sheer number of catchments that they actually cross and are impacted by. At the time, ECAN funded the Bells, I believe, to, she's nodding, so it was ECAN, manage this population. But you were only managing that one catchment, right? Yeah, but what it showed from when we put the trackers on is all of these catchments. They're not in all of these catchments, the whole catchment. You can see that from the colours, but they are actually feeding and using all of these catchments in some way. So we need to change the way that we're managing that species and think about it more in a landscape scale approach instead of just by site or even catchment by catchment. And then this on the right here, each of these are different. So this is the same population that's breeding in one site, but these are all the locations that they're roosting in. And none of these locations had protection either. So it was great for us, and we're able to kind of feed this information to ECAN and to BIRDS. And so then we can kind of change the way that we're thinking about in terms of the management. So this is just an example of some of the behavioural data as well that we get. I just like to show this one because, so this is South Island pied oystercatchers. This is a whole 12 months of movements from one pied oystercatcher. This is the time of day. This is the day on the bottom. The brighter colour down here means that it's moving more and using more energy. The darker colour means that it's kind of stationary, not doing very much. And just by plotting it this way, Sam does quite a lot of this, you can immediately see it migrated here and it migrated here. And in this one image, you can see it's at a coastal site here. We know this because this pattern is tidal, and it's because they're foraging out at the coastal flats. So they're out in their winter site, and here they're at their breeding site, and they've got a completely different pattern of behavior. It's more diurnal, night and day. And so this curve that you kind of see here, that's the change in daylight. And so there's quite a lot that you can just instantly show with these guys. And then just to finish up, because I told you at the beginning that this project is very much about trying to work out how often they're on the public conservation land versus how often they're not. So here's a couple of results from them. I'll just put it in context with some of the other species in the workstream. So Kia, this is just a small number of trackers to date at the moment on one site, but they were only outside DOC public conservation land 0.06% of the time. So DOC's doing pretty well with them. The bittern, they were outside of the public conservation land 51.45% of the time. Lots of work needed there. The black-fronted terns, they were 85.5% of the time outside any of our public conservation land. And the South Island pied oystercatchers were 97.84% of the time. So this is why it's really important to have those holistic approaches. Nobody's an island. We need to be working together because most of the time these species are not on any single person's land. They are on multiple. And I'll leave it at that. So these are the collaborations. And if you've seen a flagged, particularly a SIPO or a banded dotterel, please put it in Falcon. Okay. Particularly in Taranaki, this does get rolled in. So DOC uses it when applications come in to advise on whether or not. So I think you were just talking about a specific body, right, in relation to one area of it. But if they're talking to DOC, then this data should be kind of feeding into those conversations. Yeah.